The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University. This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we want to welcome you all again to our series on Bill Baxley, Alabama's most legendary Alabama Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor, too. The first two series, we've talked about his past, growing up in Dothan and being a prominent lawyer there and one of the most prominent lawyers in the state now. But his history of being elected the youngest Attorney General in Alabama history in 1970 at age 28, and his 8 years as Attorney General. What a progressive tenure he had. This week we're going to get into some real nuts and bolts cases that Bill's legendary for, that some of y'all may take for granted and wonder how those things happen and have read history books about it. But Bill Baxley was the instigator of a lot of the most famous cases. He was a prosecutor, one of the best prosecutors in state history. But we're going to talk about some landmark things he did as Attorney General of Alabama from 1970 to 78. And we'd be amiss if we didn't start with the most important thing. A lot of people have always wondered about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, and Bill's prosecuted those Klansmen for years and years. But we're going to go on. He'll tell you the inside story of how he prosecuted those horrendous crimes. And growing up as a little boy in Alabama, we were all just didn't take it for granted how bad that was, that 16th Street Baptist Church. But Bill, go into that and your background. I wanted to go into how you were sitting in the Capsig house and at Tuscaloosa, Alabama, when you were a student, when that thing happened. Was it 1963 that bombing was occurred?
63.
It was a September day, wasn't it?
September 15th.
Go into the history of that thing, how you prosecuted, and going back to your whole thing about that.
Well, 63 was a momentous year in the civil rights movement. It was probably the most violent year of all of them. They had a lot of bad things happen.
Was that the dog thing too? Bull Connor, them doing the dogs in '63 was saying?
Yeah, that's why the 16th Street was the bullseye for the bomb, because they let the marchers come out of 16th Street Church. Then they were kids, because the older people couldn't give up their jobs, so the marching, the demonstrations in Birmingham became the children's movement, they called it.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so they would meet in the assemble in the 16th Street, and then come out and march, and they'd be met by fire hoses and police dogs.
Bull Connor stuff.
Bull Connor stuff. But you want to know why? What happened?
Tell the whole story about how you got it.
Okay. Well, they'd been having a lot of things that year. March on Washington, Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. Medgar Evers got killed in Mississippi.
That was 63, wasn't it?
That was 63. All that was 63. It was all terrible. But then on September 15th, 63, it was on Sunday, and I was over at my fraternity house getting ready to eat Sunday dinner, and it came over the news that there'd been another bombing in Birmingham, which was nothing unusual. There'd been all kind of bombings for, I think, 40-something of them over the past few
called
years.
Birmingham for that reason.
Yeah, they were called Birmingham over the rest of the country. And so it came that there'd been another one at 16th Street Avenue Baptist Church, which is the most historic black church in town. And so I stayed and watched the news and didn't eat. And after a while it came, there'd been a lot of injuries, and then it came, there'd been some deaths. And it came out that there'd been 4 little children that were killed. And I didn't eat. I lost my appetite, and I didn't eat all that day. That night I didn't eat. And that really worried me, because although there'd been a lot of bad things in the civil rights movement and a lot of bad things that year, to me, this was the worst of all, because you have 4 innocent little children in a house of worship that are killed for no reason other than the color of their skins. And so I vowed I wanted to do something about it. Now, you got to understand what I thought I would be, when I said I wanted to do something about it, I thought maybe the FBI or the feds would solve that case and find out who did it. And if they did, I wanted to go volunteer to the U.S. Attorney or the FBI or whoever, that I wanted to help. By help, I meant running errands, bringing Cokes, bringing hot dogs, toting books, toting briefcases. If they wanted me to write a little bit, I'd drop out of school for a year, law school for a year. That's what I thought I might be able to do. And so that affected me. And so.
Were you in undergraduate school or law school?
I was finishing law school, my last year in law school. I was thinking about I'd maybe drop out my last year or last semester and go help if they arrested somebody. Of course, they didn't arrest anybody, didn't charge anybody. And so then fast forward, and being fortunate and being in the right place at the right time, less than 7 years after that, I was elected Attorney General of Alabama.
Wasn't too long after it.
Yeah.
You were DA at 23 in Dothan.
24.
24, and you were 4 years DA, and then.
Yeah, this happened in September of '63, and in May of '70, I was elected Attorney General.
So in 7 years, you were Attorney General.
Yeah, and so I got to thinking that the night before we got sworn in January of '71, the night before they had given me keys to the office, keys to all the state cars signed to the Attorney General, a commission, a badge, all kind of stuff about directions. We couldn't get in because I'd beat the incumbent. I hadn't been in the office till the next day. But I was sitting around that night, and I was going over that stuff that they had given us, and it had little cards for all the major people in the office. And it was that back then was before these Watt 800 numbers. And so they had, you didn't have 800-833 and whatever, all those 877 that you could call all over. But they had the name of all 10 or 12 biggest cities in Alabama, and then a local phone number in those cities: Birmingham, Mobile, Huntsville, Gadsden, Anniston, Selma, and so they had given cards for each top official in the Attorney General's office, and you could take those cards, and if you were traveling, you'd be, say in Birmingham, you'd call a local Birmingham number, and for some way or other they'd pick up the switchboard at the state capitol in Montgomery. The lady would pick up and say State of Alabama, and you'd say ring Attorney General's office, ring the Lieutenant Governor's office, ring the Governor's office, ring agriculture, anything you wanted. Or you could tell them, call from Birmingham and say, how about ringing this number in Mobile or this number in Tuscaloosa, and they'd hook you up. So I was reading, looking at that card, and I was thinking, you know, I'm going to be using this often. And I thought back that I made a vow I wanted to do something about that church bombing. And I continually thought about that because it had affected me. And I said, I may be going in the only position in the whole world where you can really do something other than bringing books and hot dogs and things, because the Attorney General is in control of all state prosecutions. And so I took that card and I wrote those little girls' names, all 4 of them on there, because every time I used that card, I wanted to be reminded of that little vow I'd made, because I said, this time, you're going to be in a place where you might really can do something. Might be the only person that can. So after I got in, we started working on the bombing case, and most of the stuff that we found from the local agencies and things that were no help at all. They spent most of their time investigating the theory that's crazy seeming now, but a theory that the blacks themselves had set off the bomb to, quote, get sympathy for their cause.
Is that right?
Yeah.
With 4 girls killed. 4
little girls killed, innocent little children. So it took a while, and we worked on it and worked on it. And what I didn't know at the time, don't let me get too long on this.
No, go. I want to know the details.
Well, what I didn't realize back then was the FBI knew who did it within hours, almost minutes after it happened.
They knew, the FBI
Yes,
knew.
they solved it. They knew who did it. And so we finally started making some progress. It took years. We went off on 2 or 3 tangents that wasn't wasted because we got something out of it. Our first suspect was a guy named J.B. Stoner out of Atlanta. And we got a tip that he and his group had done the bombing. And they had done a bunch of bombings. They bombed a lot of temples around the South. Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte, Jacksonville, Miami, New Orleans. They set one in Birmingham, but the custodian came in and found it the next morning. It didn't go off, but Stoner and them had found they had done a bunch of bombings. But we found out after it took a couple of years that they didn't do that one, even though they did a bunch of others. But it wasn't wasted time because we found out that in '57, Stoner had and his group had bombed Shuttlesworth Church, and Reverend Shuttlesworth, the airport's named for him, Fred Shuttlesworth.
In Birmingham?
In Birmingham, they had bombed his church, and but thank goodness nobody was injured or hurt, and the statute of limitations had run in 5 years on that. But we solved that case, and some of the bright young guys in my office found that even though the normal statute was 5 years if there's nobody with injury or death, by statute of limitations, that means after 5 years you can't prosecute anybody, even though if you got confessions. But in Alabama, they had a loophole that our folks found that said if you set off a dangerous explosive in or dangerously near an occupied dwelling, there's no statute of limitations. And so Shuttlesworth Church was only about a foot or 2 on either side from houses. It was in a residential area. So we went back and my folks dug up who occupied those houses on those dates back in '57, and we charged Stoner we couldn't charge him that he didn't do the church bombing. We charged him with bombing not Shuttlesworth Church. We solved him with setting off a dynamite explosive, dangerous explosive, dangerously near such and such an address occupied by so-and-so. We found out who was living in those houses, and we convicted old Stoner, and he got the maximum you could get, no injuries, for 10 years, and that put him and his group out of commission. And then we found out in Montgomery where the Klan had killed, the Montgomery Klan had taken a truck driver driving a Winn-Dixie truck, had stopped him and made him jump off the bridge on the and they found it, never went as a crime because they found his body down about 30 miles downriver, badly decomposed, and we found out the Montgomery Klan had done that and made a case against them and got some indictments and got confessions and solved that case that had never been carried. His name was Willie Edwards, and but we didn't get to go to court with that because we couldn't prove cause of death of Willie Edwards because they didn't do an autopsy. It wasn't carried as a crime, and so since we couldn't prove cause of death, we couldn't try anybody. But
so what brought you to the 16th Street Church thing?
Well, we started making progress, and I investigated. I started finding out things, and then the more we got into it, we realized that the FBI had known who did it right away.
Bill, why wasn't the FBI, why weren't they prosecutors for the...
Hoover thought they didn't have that strong of a case. It wasn't that strong of a case. And back then, you had nearly all white juries, even in federal court.
Right.
And in Alabama, we had only male white juries.
Right.
And so...
so Hoover knew they couldn't...
Hoover was very much afraid that they didn't have the strongest case in the world. Some of the evidence they'd gotten it illegally by illegal wiretaps.
I see.
And I can't quarrel really with Hoover making that decision.
Well, I'm glad I knew that, because I wondered if it was some kind of political thing, but it was really just Hoover making the decision.
Yeah, and if they had gone and lost it, we couldn't have come back and done it.
I see.
Then. So
it really worked out better. So how did y'all get involved?
Well, the federal statute had run after 5 years, too, so they couldn't do it after 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
But when we started seeing we were overlapped, I thought the FBI would cooperate. And so I wrote a letter and told them we wanted their help, knowing that we were on the same track. By then, it was right before Hoover died. So whatever year that was how long it took us to get to the right people. And so I never did hear back from them. And I didn't hear. And I thought, well, they got cause to worry about a elected official, me, from Alabama, because people from Alabama weren't exactly electing people that would prosecute the Klan. And but after a while, Hoover died, and I thought, well, there'll be a change. Then we went through about 3 or 4 agents and succeeding Hoover or temporary heads of the FBI. None of them would help. And finally, I'm digressing, but this is important. As a friend of mine from Alabama, but he had been gone for 30 years and had become a journalist, and his name was Jack Nelson. He was from Talladega, and he had become by then the best reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and was in Washington as their bureau chief. And he was a friend of mine, and so I was out with him in Washington, and he said, "You still working on that bombing case?" He knew that we were working on it. I said, "Yeah, I think we got it solved." And I said, "But we can't do anything further because the FBI won't cooperate." And so I told him all about it. He said, "You think, I think I might can help you on that. You want me to help you?" And I said, yeah, we're going to have to quit if don't get some help. So I went on back to the hotel, went to bed, and the next morning the phone rang, and it was Nelson. He said, you sure you want me to help you try to get the FBI to work with you in that case, that bombing case where the little girls were killed? I said, yeah, of course. He said, all right, I just want to make sure you felt the same way after you had your coffee that you did when you had those beers last night. And I said, yeah. And so he went over and did some magic, and I think he threatened that LA Times was going to run big stories about it in front page and submit it for Pulitzer Prize, and say that the authorities in Alabama and the FBI were covering up and stopping the prosecution of the Klansmen that had killed the little girls. And so he told them that. Now, I don't know whether he really had the authority from his bosses to do that or not, but they called, said they wanted to help. So things changed. They still didn't help the way they ought to.
Well, now, then you took over the case, though, and then who was the lady who saw the thing? She lived in Chicago, getting to the...
Ms. Glenn, we already had her. She didn't see it. She saw, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we had one good witness before that. And it turned out she had told the FBI back then. But we had found her, but we couldn't find out where she was. But her name was Miss Curtis Glenn, and she lived in Detroit, not Chicago, in Detroit. And she had been down to Birmingham visiting friends, and it was hot on that September night, and nobody had air conditioning then. And she was black, and she was visiting a friend It was an alley behind the 16th Street Church, an alley that went all the way through the block, and some houses on the other side of the alley. And she was sitting on a porch, back porch of one of those houses
Probably
where
trying
she
to
was
get cool.
staying. And so at about 1:30 or 2 in the morning, a car pulled in to that alley, and it was right in front of where she was watching. And so she noticed there was 4 white men in it, and 3 of them got out, and she called it a satchel, a satchel. And they went around the corner, and one of them stayed in the car, but they left the doors open with the light on. And so she saw it, and she identified that person who was in the passenger front seat as Robert Chambliss. Picked him out, his picture out. And she knew 4 white men weren't supposed to be over there in that neighborhood at night, so she wrote down a description of that car and the tag number and everything like that. And it turned out to be Tommy Blanton's car. And she identified Chambliss's picture. But we finally found her and went to, I sent the investigators to Detroit, and they came back and said, man, Miss Glenn is great. Said, we got good news and bad news. What you want to hear? I said, well, tell me the good news first. They said, she is sharp, she's smart, she makes a good impression. She saw it, the whole thing, wrote down the tag number, identified the picture of the passenger seat occupant, and it was Chambliss. She picked him out of all pictures. Back then, she picked his picture out now, said she never would forget it. And I said, well, what in the world can be bad? And they said, well, she said she's not coming back to Alabama. Back then, in state court, you couldn't make somebody from out of state come. Now, every state has what they call reciprocal subpoena, where you can have an Alabama subpoena and go to California and get the California courts to enforce the subpoena. But we didn't have that back then. And so we couldn't get her to come back. She wouldn't agree. Well, I told them, I said, go back and tell her so-and-so and so-and-so. They went back and told him, no, she won't do it. And so I said, I know what we'll do. I'll send one of my black assistants up there. So I sent them back up, and they came back and said, she won't come back. So I said, if I got to do everything that's done around here, let me show you what y'all ought to do. So I went up there, and I started telling her why she ought to come back.
You went to Detroit?
Yeah.
Third try.
Fourth time.
Fourth time.
And so she said,
who was with you in Detroit?
My investigators, and Jack Showers, and I can't remember all the investigators.
Yeah, but you investigated.
John East, and so they had told me she was really nice and that she'd put out coffee and little cookies and things for them every time they went over there. So she put those out for me, and she said, Mr. Baxley, said, I'm sorry you wasted your time. Said, coming up here. Said, you look like a nice man. I think you must be. All these people you've sent up here are nice people, but I have told them over and over and over, and I'm telling you, you've wasted your time. I'm not going back to Alabama. She said, I wouldn't set foot in Alabama for any reason. I wouldn't go through it on a train. If I was somewhere else and got deceased, I wouldn't let them drive my body through, my remains, she called it, through Alabama. So I'm not going. And so I was torn between about cry or getting mad with her. And so I went over to that little tray, and she had a Jet magazine. And I picked that magazine. It was on the table where the goodies were. And it fell open to a page, and it was that magazine was a commemoration of the Montgomery bus boycott. And so it opened to a page where on one page it had Rosa Parks and being arrested. And on the other page it had Fred Gray, her lawyer, bonding her out of jail. And so I looked at that. The whole Jet magazine was on the Montgomery bus boycott and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. And so I looked at it and saw Fred. And Fred by then was in the legislature.
Fred Gray.
Fred Gray, great lawyer. I tried a lot of cases with him and against him. He's still alive, 90-something, 96, I think.
Still practicing, I believe.
Still going to his office. Mm-hmm. And Fred is one of the true heroes of the Civil Rights Movement. But I said, I showed her that book. And I said, if Miss Glenn, if this lawyer right here, this man you're seeing that Dr. King trusted at the birth of the civil rights movement to be his lawyer, and he was the client hired by Miss Rosa Parks. If this man came up here and told you you need to go back to Alabama, would you go? And she looked at it and said, well, I would consider it. And that was so different. I said, let's get out of here, boys. And so we left. And back then they had pay phones everywhere on the street, you know, little pay phones in booths, in glass booths. And so we got about 3 or 4 blocks from her house, and there was a pay phone. And I called and thank goodness got Fred and got him to agree to drop everything and come up there and talk to her. And Wallace let us use the state plane. We flew all over in the state plane. Wallace gave us every bit of help he could, and people ought to know that in working on that case. And so we
Fred
stayed.
went the next time.
We stayed,
Fred went the next time then.
Yeah, so we stayed. No, it wasn't on the next time. We stayed
Oh.
up there and sent the plane back and got Fred.
Brought him
and
back.
brought him up there. So the next morning,
Next day.
yeah, the next day we went over there with Fred. And so she put the little goodies out again, but she wasn't anybody's, you know, shrinking violet. So before she let us sit down, she got that book and turned those pages and carried it up there and put it by Fred's head and looked back at Fred. She didn't want us to be playing a trick on her. She looked at that picture and looked at Fred and looked at that picture. And thank goodness Fred didn't age much. You could tell Fred was the same Fred that was Dr. King's lawyer. And so she folded that book up and said, y'all sit down, I'll listen. So Fred told us y'all to come back. She said, well, I'll go.
And then y'all, the rest of history, you prosecuted Chambliss, and who were the Klansmen that were?
That's another story. I decided to only indict Chambliss. We knew there were 4 of them. One of them by then had died. There were 3 of them left. And so we had the strongest case on Chambliss. Now, what the FBI did in cooperating, they didn't do, they cooperated, but that meant I put a new investigator that hadn't been working on it, Bob Eddy, when we knew we were going to have FBI cooperation. He got in it, and he did a masterful job of tying everything together. But they let him, they said, we can't let you have people taking our files out, but if you'll send somebody up here, we'll cooperate with them and give them a desk and place to work. And so I sent Bob Eddy, told him to drop his other cases, go up there, stay there till he solved that case. And so their definition of cooperation, by there I mean the FBI and mine, 180 degrees apart. If Bob knew enough to ask for something, they'd bring it to him. And they wouldn't let him copy it, and they wouldn't let him make pictures of it, but he could write down notes of what was in their files. If they let him see their files, we could have indicted at least Blanton, because they had the car stuff and they had other stuff on Blanton, but it was still enough to indict Chambliss. But I decided I wouldn't indict any of the others, even though we knew who did it, even the other 3, because we had a stronger case against Chambliss. We had Ms. Glenn, and by then we had we got the Chambliss niece and Chambliss's sister-in-law and Chambliss's wife had been cooperating with the FBI, and so we indicted only Chambliss.
This ends our 3rd edition of Bill Baxley, The Legacy of Bill Baxley. We'll finish up next week with the 4th edition, and we cover some more corruption trials he did as Attorney General of Alabama. Former Attorney General of Alabama and former Lieutenant Governor of Alabama, Bill Baxley. Thank you for watching. Hope you tune in again next week for Alabama Politics.
This has been Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, a production of Troy University Television. Opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Troy University, its administration, faculty, staff, or students.